Hire a banker, they said. Put Mark Carney in the House of Commons, they said. Everything will be calm and steady. But after his cabinet appointments and some of his own actions, could Canada be heading towards our own, yet again, national nightmare? Hello, everyone. I'm Adrienne. With me are Brian Lilley and Warren Kinsella. Elbows up. Remember, elbows up. We saw the dancing, Brian. Thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
He goes to the
Thumbs
White
up in the
House
White
and
House.
has a good meeting with President Trump. Still nothing. We've heard zero on trade. I anticipate that forthcoming. But we have a prime minister who claims to want to fight against the U.S., but is acting and putting through and putting laws into this country as if he's doing executive orders, just like Donald Trump. I find the whole thing bizarre. Let's break it down.
As we look to build out this economy, it's my pleasure on behalf of the Cabinet to sign this order to deliver that tax cut et respecter nos engagements, notre engagement pour les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. Thank you very much.
Brian, what is does Prime Minister Carney know he's not a president, can't sign executive orders?
He loves the performance aspect of this, doesn't he? I'll hand it to him. I didn't think he was that kind of guy. This is the second time he's had a cabinet meeting, invited the cameras in, signs a fake executive order. Look, we do have an equivalent of executive orders. They're called orders in cabinet, and you need, I believe, at the federal level, at least 4 cabinet ministers to sign them. So he did this with lowering the carbon tax to 0. He just signed it as if I'm Donald Trump. Here's me signing the order. And now he's done it saying, I direct you to get a middle-class tax cut by July 1st. Look, we know he promised it, and I'm going to welcome the tax cut. Everyone should. But why the performance art? Why the aping of Donald Trump and the executive orders while claiming that you are elbows up against Trump? It makes 0 sense to me, but it also undermines our way of governing. I mean, this is a guy who's already governing without Parliament. Parliament hasn't sat since mid-December. I think it's around December 16th. And here we are in the middle of May. We will have Parliament come back in 2 weeks for a couple of weeks and not even pass a budget, and then recess for the summer and come back in the fall. Still no budget. Nothing expected until maybe November or December, and we'll have a fall economic statement. This guy is trying to govern in a very imperial presidential style.
Warren, I appreciate the attempt at transparency. And I know that's certainly what, US President Donald Trump is saying he's doing by opening it all up, showing people what they're doing. I just find with Carney's actions, from your perspective, someone who has been on the Hill, been in all levels of government, seen how we achieve our legislation, what was your response to seeing all that?
Well, it's not, as both of you have pointed out, how our system of government works. We do not have an executive in the way of the United States, but even in the United States, a lot of the executive orders that Donald Trump has signed require the approval of Congress. So even in that case, it's not real. I am astounded he's done this. Like, maybe you give him a break on the carbon tax one. It was kind of campaign related, and God knows campaigns are all about show and tell kind of stuff. But this was bizarre, and apparently what he signed were mandate letters to ministers. So basically, those are the prime minister or a premier sends them to their ministers saying, "Here's what I expect of you. Here's the objectives I've got for your department and for the government."
It was actually just a little document that said, I instruct the ministers to work to pass a tax cut by July 1st.
Which is a mandate letter. So anyway, we're getting in the weeds here. The point is, it is not something that is of force and effect, as lawyers say. That's not how our system works. And, and again, our system shouldn't work where we've been without a budget for months from the government of Canada. Like, I have no idea when these guys plan to have a budget, and that is unacceptable. So we've got the Showtime stuff on the one hand, we've got some substantive document like the budget of Canada, where we don't know when it is coming, perhaps in the fall. It's not a good start.
Okay. Speaking of stumbling out of the gates, so to speak. Let's talk about this cabinet that Carney has put together. Warren and I recently were on radio together. We were trying to be optimistic on the day of the announcement that this is not going to be a show type of government, that we had under Trudeau. But Brian, we had the very first day after their announcement as cabinet ministers, we had the justice minister saying he's going to work from home. We had a treasury board minister who apparently has a propensity to vote from the bathroom. We have a new foreign affairs minister who is blaming Israel for a war that Hamas started. We have no budget coming from the finance minister. And then we have a minister responsible for Canadian identity that is likely going to be single-handedly responsible for potentially ripping this country apart by shutting down the idea of pipelines across Canada. And now we have a new housing minister who says, nothing's wrong in housing. The prices are fine. What the hell happened here?
Well, first off, I want to thank Warren for reminding me that our Treasury Board President, Mr. Shafkat Ali, was previously most well known for voting from the stall of the men's room.
Yeah.
There's not much that you do in the stall of a men's room, so we all know what he was doing while he's voting in the House of Commons, and had to apologize. I'd completely forgotten that. And by the way, I've read 3 of his bios, still don't know much about the guy, other than he came to Canada at some point as a young man with a suitcase and a dream, sold some real estate, and is now president of the Treasury Board. It's a Canadian success story.
And Vote Palestine, don't forget, he's the most senior minister who's embraced the Vote Palestine platform.
Yeah, so there's a lot of worrisome things going on in here. And look, every government needs to stay on message. And I hate when governments stay on message. I was over at Queen's Park earlier today, and I was saying that to a provincial cabinet minister whose eyes were, he was bug-eyed about the federal cabinet outs yesterday, saying, what happened? And I said, yeah, I love this when they stay off message, but from a government perspective, you need to stay on message. And Mark Carney does that big interview with Vashi Kapelos. Very good interview. Kudos to Vashi. She pushed him hard. He pushed back. I like it when politicians do that. You get to learn more about them. But he said, yes, I'm open to pipelines. I'm open to these changes. I'm open to more oil and gas projects. And then Stephen Guilbeault, Minister for Canadian Identity, which apparently means Minister of Everything, comes out and says, we don't need more pipelines. We're about to hit peak oil. TMX isn't even operating at 50% capacity, which, by the way, is misinformation. I thought the Heritage Minister, Minister of Canadian Identity, was supposed to fight against that. So he puts out misinformation. He puts out absolute lies, contradicts the boss. That's the worst part. Warren can tell you more about that, but you contradict the boss. That's bad news for a minister. The, Anita Anand coming out as our foreign affairs minister and blaming all the deaths on Israel when Hamas started the war, doesn't even denounce Hamas, doesn't mention them.
Food and aid to Gaza. What do you think of that decision? And is the Canadian government doing anything to stop that?
We cannot allow the continued use of food as a political tool. The Prime Minister has been very clear about that. Over 50,000 people have died as a result of the aggression caused against the Palestinian and the Gazan people in Palestine. And using food as a political tool is simply unacceptable. And we need to continue to work towards a ceasefire. We need to ensure that we have a two-state solution, and Canada will continue to maintain that position.
I said that as soon as she was appointed. Great. We've gone from one Hamasnik, Melanie Joly, to another in Anita Anand. And then Gregor Robertson, the new housing minister, who was mayor of Vancouver when their housing prices doubled, and municipal governments are mostly responsible for housing policy and issues. He's out at 10 o'clock at night doing a multi-part explanation of why he said no when he was asked to housing prices need to come down. Basically, the housing policy of the Liberal government is that guy from Brantford, the boomer, giving everyone the double bird.
And Warren, we already talked about the fact that there is not going to be a federal budget. Pretty much every province in the country has been able to put forward a budget. Ontario, the biggest province of the country, is about to unveil theirs today. So it's troubling that we're not going to see the true finances of what's going on in this country. But I want to pick up on a couple of these other cabinet ministers. We've already touched on them, but let's go a little bit deeper. Let's talk about the calamity that we knew Melanie Joly was as our foreign affairs minister. We now have Anita Anand in there, who, by all measures, everybody said very positive things about, but the files that she was responsible for in the past didn't go well. Procurement, most notably. But now we have her in foreign affairs, and she takes to criticizing Israel for a war that Hamas started. And I'm wondering what your take is on her doing that, like almost as her first thing out of the gate.
Well, they are out of the gate. This is really the first time we've had a functioning federal government in many months. So it was really, really important in communications terms, in political terms, that they communicate well. And as Brian's pointed out, the prime minister did okay in his interview with Vasi. And apart from the performative theater with that mandate letter, he has done okay. As I predicted in my column on the day of the shuffle, if this government was going to have big problems, it was going to be problems coming from the newbies, either people new to big portfolios like Anand, or those who have never even been a member of parliament before, and certainly have never been a minister. There's 24 newcomers to this government, to this cabinet. 13 of them have never been a member of parliament. Now, I know that Carney was trying to project newness. He was trying to project change, but he was taking on a huge risk by bringing on people with no experience whatsoever in politics at that level. The government of Canada is not just a mom and pop popsicle shop. It is the biggest organization in the country with a budget of billions upon billions of dollars. It's critically important now when we're facing an existential threat from the Trump administration that we have people who are capable, not a housing minister who comes out and says housing prices don't need to go down, not a minister of foreign affairs who comes out and attacks provocatively and deliberately an ally of this country, and a finance minister who comes out and says, I'll give you a budget when I'm good and ready to show it to you. That is not a good start. This was not a good start for this government. And it's not just us at the Toronto Sun or Post Media saying it. Every media organization commenting on this week have said, you know what? This has been a really shitty week for this government. They better get their act together.
And this is just the first. This government is in its infancy, Brian. We've got a long road ahead of us just yet. But we would be remiss if we didn't talk about one of the other most significant issues facing every province, every city. And that, of course, is on crime and bail reform. And it's something that the premiers across the country have all written to former public safety ministers, and demanding bail reform, demanding change. We now have a justice minister who said that he wanted to take a break from his family, or wanted to take a break from politics and be with his family. So he quit. But then, polls were looking better for the Liberals. He got back in. And of course, I'm talking about Sean Fraser, former housing minister, disaster. Now justice minister. Yep, disaster. He's going to work from home, and I guess he's going to get that time with his family. But I just find it odd, Brian. And I recognize I'm working from home. That's the situation in which I'm in. But I'm not the Justice Minister of Canada. What's your take on that sort of very laissez-faire attitude to this major and significant portfolio?
Look, I don't want to pick on lawyers, Warren, but Sean Fraser's a lawyer. Is he qualified to be justice minister? This is normally a position that goes to someone who spent a lot of time dealing with criminal law, for example, either as a defense counsel a prosecutor. You know, Peter MacKay used to represent Central Nova, the same riding that Sean Fraser's from. He was also justice minister. Apparently, we put a lot of blue nosers in as justice ministers. But Peter MacKay was a prosecutor, and not just for a year or two. Sean Fraser practiced mostly administrative law. He had interest in international law, which always, you know, that's just airy-fairy stuff that has no force in Canada for the most part. It's great theory. He was focused in on things like access to information. Okay, that's important to me as a journalist, but it has no impact on the criminal law. And this guy is now in charge of the criminal law system at a time when violent crime is through the roof. You know, you can't even debate this. This is Statistics Canada data on violent crime more than doubling over the last 10 years. The population hasn't doubled, but violent crime has. Gun crime, and not from guys who were out hunting, that has gone up significantly. Sexual assault, property crimes, home invasions, car thefts, things that people care about have gone up, and the bail issue is massive. Wab Kinew, the new Democrat Premier of Manitoba, was just here in Toronto at Queen's Park. He's one of the people calling for bail reform, saying, we've got to lock criminals up. David Eby, new Democrat Premier of British Columbia on the left coast, wants bail reform, says we're not keeping people in jail long enough. We've got these repeat violent offenders that are out on bail, commit a crime, get out on bail, commit another crime, and they're out on bail again. And that is all due to, as much as it pains the Liberals to admit this, due to legislation that they passed. And they went above and beyond what the Supreme Court said. They went above and beyond what everybody else wanted. New York State passed similar legislation at the same time, and they've walked away from it under the Democrats. We should be doing the same. They have not been willing to do it. They've done minor tweaks. And in speaking to people who know Sean Fraser, they do not expect him to take this file seriously. You know, it's great for Mark Carney to say he wants a true cabinet government. If he's going to fix the problems that even he recognizes exist in the country, I think he's going to have to force a lot of these things, from communications, as in shut your trap when you leave the meeting, down to, no, you are going to fix this problem. No, you're not going to freelance on Israel. Although I think he's closer to Camp Hamas than Camp Jerusalem. But he's going to have to crack the whip, and that means more centralized control. People love to say we shouldn't have centralized control, and then you see what these clowns do once they leave the room.
Warren, put a fine point on this for us. Canadians, you know, maybe paying attention to some of it, but these clips are making their rounds. They're on the socials. The so-called, you know, more mainstream media news outlets, they're all covering it, and not in necessarily even a positive way. Even I think CBC had to show these clips. But is your perspective that this is just gonna, you know, these are just first day butterflies, and this will settle down? Or are we seeing truly amongst these cabinet ministers in very important portfolios, and particularly in the areas that Canadians were very angry with the former Liberal government about? Are we just they're showing their true colors? Who really speaks for this government?
Well, you know, the Prime Minister ultimately does. And as I said, I think he's doing all right so far. But his ministers have given him a bad week, you know, and they've had to do a cleanup on aisle 3 already. Gregor Robertson had to walk back his statement, his clear and unambiguous statement that no, housing prices don't need to go down. He actually said that with his own mouth. Well, he had to walk that one back. Anand is still out there with her anti-Israel stuff that verges on, in my view, anti-Semitism. So she hasn't walked that back yet. Champagne, like, I don't know what he's doing. If he's not doing a budget, if you're a minister of finance and you're not putting together a budget, I'm not quite sure what you're going to be doing in your day-to-day job. The problem with all of this is we are, as you pointed out, in the middle of May. We're just a few weeks away from the House of Commons rising for the summer. So, they needed, we expected, we wanted, we were told, we were promised that they would hit the ground running. You remember all of that? And this is a government that's going to get to work for Canadians and protect our jobs and our way of life. And this is not a good start. Like, it looks really sloppy, it looks really amateur, and it's not what we were led to believe. And all the talk we'd been having a few days ago about Pierre Poilievre and his problems, those are gone. Everybody's now focused on the
That's right.
problems that the Carney government's got. So I think he's got to crack the whip and say, quit screwing around. No more mistakes are allowed. We've got to present a better face to the Canadian people. But he hasn't done that yet.
Well, Canada, if this last week is any indication of what we can expect from the Carney government, it's going to be a very bumpy ride. Well, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel and go to the torontosun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you will not find anywhere else.